I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in, from this time forth and forevermore. Amen.
Good morning, church. It's good to be back, and I bring you greetings from my family and many friends from Romania. As Maurice said, I haven't preached in English for a long time. One Sunday, last Sunday. But while I was in Romania, I assure you I speak nothing in English, non-English. And I also managed to preach not last Sunday. I know many of you thought, how many sermons to preach? 1, 2, 3, as often happens when I go home. God spared me this time, and I'm glad about that. I also have a bit of a blocked nose and change of voice, perhaps from the AC in the airplane. I hope it's nothing worse. And I have to say that towards the end of our holiday in Romania, home, I start agonizing about what I'm going to preach. So you see, being a pastor, a preacher, going on a holiday is not a complete disconnection. You have to plan ahead, to think ahead. And I was determined to carry on with Mark, but because Andy is going to preach next Sunday, and I don't know exactly how much and how he's going to cover, we have an idea. I thought I don't want to go too far ahead or go or uncover one of the portion he's going to preach from. And as I pray and seek God's guidance, I quickly look on the website of our church to see what Mark preached. I haven't listened to his sermon, but I noticed that he preached from a psalm. Then I thought, in line with our recent news, all the recent news, and I have to say I couldn't disconnect entirely. I don't listen to the mass media news, but I also stay in touch to see what's going on in the world. Psalm 121 might be a very good psalm to preach from. And I receive a lot of encouragement just preparing this message. And I hope it's going to serve us well. Because I'm absolutely sure each one of you in this room and every single human being struggle with fear. Life is full of fear. We like it or not, this is a reality. From childhood to old age, fear is our constant companion through life. There are all kinds of fears. There is the fear of the dark and the monsters that will get us if we walk in the night. Remember your childhood? Maybe even last week. There is the fear of abandonment, especially when parents are distant and unresponsive. There is the fear of failure and what will happen if we have to tell our mates and our friends, our children even, that we aren't that they think we are. There is the fear of rejection, when others decide to make us the outsider and give us the cold shoulder. We've been through this. There is the fear of being nobody. There is the fear of being somebody. If you become popular. There is this fear of public speaking. It's among the top. There is the fear of being known. Really, the fear of intimacy. Have you heard of people who prefer to live in isolation just because they are afraid of getting in intimate and closer relationships? There is the fear of not having enough. There is the fear, the ultimate fear of death. There are many other kinds of fears. We call them phobias, we call them different ways, but they are the same thing. They are deeply seated and rooted in our human being, in our soul, in our heart. And the question is, what can we do about these fears? How do we confront our fear? May I ask you to take a moment to acknowledge within your heart, what is your deepest fear right now? I was chatting with my own family, hearing about what's going on in England while I was away, about these riots and stuff. And I don't want to develop it too much. But we come to a point when we said, I wonder how long we may have to stay for the first time since we moved. I'm not suggesting anything. It was just that thing. What if these things develop to a scale that can't be controlled? What if? What if? What do we do about that? Before we dig into the psalm, let's observe our natural response to fear. What is our normal, natural human response when it comes to fear? Have you noticed? Have you realized? Think of your deepest fear. Our natural response is to try to control the things that produce fear. It's a tendency. Look, parents try to control their children because they don't want to see them hurt. Parents also try to control their children because they don't want them to hurt them, to shame them, and make them look like failures. Husbands and wives do this so they won't be hurt by each other. Frequently, they enter into a conspiracy of self-protection through which they deny their fears and avoid even having to face them. Adult children do this by not bringing up the hurt they feel towards their parents, and so they pass on the same fears to their children, and so on. We try to control life, but we can't do it. And we've learned this, particularly in the passage we've studied about the storms of life. And Sylvia already mentioned about it. And that was one of the lessons that Jesus taught his disciples in that storm that he pushed intentionally his disciples into. So they learn we cannot control life. Therefore, what do we do when life is bigger than we are and we can't control it? What can we do? Since this is always true, we need to answer this question. We cannot avoid it. We really need to find an answer. We can either get angry and lash out at one another, or we can even lash out to God. We get angry with him because he allows such things in our lives. Or we can trust God and have full confidence in him that he can control all things. The storms of life and even our mountains of fears. So the subject I'm going to preach today is facing our mountains of fear. Because I suspect we don't have only one little fear. And they keep building up and building up and building up in our lives until they turn to be huge mountains of fear. This is what we learn from Psalm 121. This is actually the main point of this psalm. Look at how it starts. Verse 1. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? I lift up. I'm ready to face those mountains. They are there. I acknowledge them. I don't hide from them. I lift up my eyes. I'm facing them. And I'm raising this question. From where does my help come? Now, in order to fully understand what we are going to learn this morning, we also need to carefully read the heading of this psalm, a song of ascents. We are familiar, those of us who have been long enough in church, we are familiar with these songs or psalms of ascents. As a matter of fact, from Psalm 120 to 134, each one of these psalms is called a psalm of ascent. These psalms are what we can call, let's say, pilgrim psalms. Psalms sung by pilgrims coming up to Jerusalem from all over the country. And they used to come at least 3 times a year. Those 3 times were mandatory for every Jew. They had to travel to Jerusalem on a Passover, a Tabernacles, and Pentecost. So 3 times a year, they would have to ascend towards Jerusalem. They used to sing these psalms of ascent. But now, in order to get to Jerusalem, no matter where you come from, you had to ascend up a mountain because the city was totally surrounded by mountains and built on the top. You could not avoid that, no matter where you used to live. So the pilgrim looked up and saw the mountains and immediately felt the fear and helplessness that this brings with it. We often may think that when the psalm writer refers to, I lift up my eyes to the hills, he sees in those hills like a symbol of strength, where the help may come from. But it's not true. They represent the fear. Because on those hills or mountains, there were all sorts of possible hidden dangers, attacks planned against those who traveled. So soon I will refer to a few of them. I only have 2 main points today. There will be lots of sub-points, but this just for me to help me navigate through. The first one is very simple. All of us must walk through the mountains of fear. All of us. Don't be surprised. Don't take it as something unusual. We have to walk through these mountains of fears. Verses 1 to 2. But what we need to underscore in this reality if you like a subpoint, I'm going to make it clear, is that we are never far away from the mountains of fear. However, we read in verse 2, while we walk under these pressures, facing fear, verse 2 says, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. While I faced these mountains of fear, while I was aware that yes, I may be surrounded with all these things, I don't seek help from this visible reality, but beyond that. I seek help from the one who created all this, from the one who allowed all these things in my life. He is the Lord, the one who made heaven and earth. On those days, walking through those hills or mountains, of course they were encountering physical dangers in their pilgrim's walk. There were steps, narrow trails, treacherous ledges. There were loose rocks that could crash down upon those who travel. There were robbers who could swoop down upon them. And we read, for instance, in New Testament, when Jesus, we have this experience when a person was traveling towards Jericho. What happened? Was robbed, and then the Good Samaritan comes and helps. That happened in that journey. So there were all sorts of dangers. We read in the Old Testament that David fought a lion and a bear in this sort of geography, if you like. It's all kinds of danger. Also, we also know that in those days, a part of Jew people, other nation came, made their homes in Israel, and they worship what? Idols. And often those idols were on the hills. So on this journey, they had to face all sorts of things. I don't want to spend too much time with that. It's a reality. But we also face inner mountains, not just outer mountains, physical dangers. These outside dangers are so obvious. Are we ready also to acknowledge that we may face mountains of pride, mountains of ambition, mountains of anger, mountains of expectations, of guilt, of selfishness? The list could go on and on and on. Where can I find help? That's the question. And just a side note, theologians are not quite sure the way this psalm is written could be either that a presenter present this reality and then he initiate a conversation, a little bit like Sylvia did with us with this Anglican approach to liturgy. So let's put a presenter who will say, I lift up my eyes to the hills, from where does my help come? And the others together will answer, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. It could be that, but there are others who say it is most likely that this is a sort of self-talk. A sensible, a sane self-talk. Because we also do a lot of insane, rubbish self-talk. Oh, you are not good of anything. Yeah, they told you this. Yeah, no. I will never be able to. I'm not good at that. We all do. We know our self-talk. Look at this. This is a great example of positive self-talk. When, yes, you acknowledge the dangers, you acknowledge your fears, but say, now where my help comes from? And within you, your soul gives you the answer. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Let's go in depth. From the Lord. 5 times in the entire psalm, we find this name of God, which is Yahweh. 5 times specifically in this very short psalm. And 4 times we find the pronoun he. So 9 times, 9 references to God. When you face your fears, the writer makes reference to God. Who is this Lord? Yahweh. He is. This is his name. I am that I am. And because he is, he can keep his promises. And he promises that he will always be there to support you, to help you. And what is the reference in English? Everlasting? No. All the times support in trouble. I'm just quoting in my own way. We might think of this as God's formal name, Yahweh. His contract signing name. His deal-making name. The name he always signs in blue, if you like. So you know it's the original. It's not a counterfeit. And if we quickly jump in the New Testament, we discover that Jesus was also called Lord. Lord. And he was willing to sign the contract of covenant, the new covenant, in his own blood, to prove he is always present. He is always there to support us, to help us in the midst of our fears, when we face the mountains of our fears. The Lord who helps us is the Lord who made heaven and earth. This is important to realize. It's clear here in the verse. Because the lesson is so simple. If he can create it, he can control it. Just think about that. If he could create, if he created all this just through his word, why am I doubting that he can control my situation? Or what's going on in the country? Or what's going on in the world right now? Yes, wars, economical crash, recession, possible depression, economical depression, all kinds of news. Fears are growing. But the one who created heaven and earth is able to control it. Trust in him. Trust in him. He made all there is. He can control all there is. No one else made heaven and earth. No one else has this energy, this power, this omnipotence but him. All of life shows how helpless we are, but how strong God is. Just trust in him. And at this point, the psalm moves from the awesomeness and the bigness of God to how he cares for me and my needs. Look at verse 3. And from verse 3 till the end, there are promises. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, again, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. Again, the Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. Do you see how many times this idea, He keeps you, He will keep you. And the writer moves from this notion, yes, God who created is capable to control it, but He is also not a distant God. He is someone who comes near, alongside, and He will keep you. Do you get it? He's a keeper. I read about a person who once decided to cross a frozen lake. I did that numerous times when I was a kid. I don't advise you to ever try here in Witten Lake or whatever. But in Romania, when minus 25, I guarantee you, I was safe. But I read about this person who, although realized it's quite a thick ice, he decided to cross, and after a few steps, he just was caught in fear. And suddenly he just nailed and started walking like this, and I need to act like that, tapping once, 2, 3 times, crawling, tapping, crawling. It took him a few good hours. When he was close to the other side, just to cross the lake, after he was red and shaking and struggling, he just hears like trembling, a noise behind him, and just full of fear, looks back. He realized that someone with 12 horses carrying a huge wagon, those horses literally running and galloping over the ice, crossed the lake within a few seconds or minutes while he was tapping. He realized how foolish he was. I believe sometimes we act like that walking with God. Like crawling on the ice, tapping, Lord, I know you are with me. I know you keep me. I know, but let me test this situation. Is it safe? And we keep on doing so. And while we walk, because we are all pilgrims towards heaven, we are all. While we walk in faith with Him, living in fear that the ice is too shallow, sometimes He has to just look at us and say, hey, don't worry about the ice. I'll keep you by your hand. Doesn't matter what I allow in your life. What really matters is that you hold my hand and I hold you. This whole notion, the Lord keeps, that's the second main point of the psalm. The Lord helps us in every single situation, even when we have to face these mountains of fear, by keeping us. He keeps us safe on the trail, says verse 3. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. When you walk on this dangerous path, He's promising you that He will keep you. And you will not sleep. No sleep. But let be not just very theoretical. It's nice to read about this. It's nice to affirm this reality, which I firmly believe and now never doubt. is it always the case that our foot will never be moved or sleep? Let's face the reality. What do we do in such situation when the Bible clearly mentions it, when we know this is God's promise and whatever He promised, He keeps it, and yet we look in our own life and we are shaking. We know we've been there so many times. What do we know? What we need to do? To always step backwards a little bit and see the bigger picture in the Bible. So anytime we face such a verse, we need to step back and see the wider context of the Bible. When the Bible clearly also presents His own people going through difficult situations. Let's do a bit of an exercise. We just begin, because there is a lot more to unpack. I will let you carry on throughout the day, and whenever you go back to your home group studies or care groups, do this practice. Just imagine. I know this psalm is written way after Joseph. But imagine Joseph, after he was sold by his brothers, reading this psalm. And when he is in the pit, he reads, "My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let my foot be moved here in the pit." And when he is taken out of and sold, and then he ends up in Pharaoh's house. And then after a while, you know the story, he ends up where? In jail. He carries on. And he again reads this psalm. This psalm does not promise you will never encounter or experience this physical reality in your lives. But what says is that wherever God allows you to be, He is going to be with you. And there in the pit, or in the jail, or in a hospital bed, or in this and that crisis, He will not allow you to fail. He will carry you on. Continue to trust in Him. And after Joseph goes through all these things, one after another, and then he ends up in the wonderful position being a governor in Egypt. And his own brothers come to visit him and to take provision. And they recognize him and they are scared. What is he saying? God knew it all the way. The evil you intended to do, God turned it into good. God knew it. He had a plan all the way. Even when you go through those valleys. Apply the same thing to Jeremiah, to Isaiah, to the disciples after the resurrection of Jesus, after they've done all this amazing mission and work, and they now have to pay with their own lives as martyrs. Read the same psalm. We will end up looking at Jesus Himself. Verses 3-4, there is another promise. He will be a constantly alert sentry along the way. He is not sleeping, he says here. Will never doze off. Don't even let that thought enter your mind. It is an utter impossibility for God to doze off, to not be aware, to not be awake, to be taken by surprise by what's going on in this world. Nothing and no one can take Him by surprise, whether it by day or by night, says the text. Verses 5 to 6, he will protect us from the dangers of the day and the dangers of the night. He did it with the Israelites in the past. He does it in our days too. And verse 7, the Lord will protect us from evil. He will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. Again, if you look back, what I said about Joseph, Moses, and all these people of God, even David, they experienced, in a sense, evil. But what was his answer? The evil those people intended to do, what God did? Turn it in our favor. This is one way in which God protects us from all evil. Yes, we are going to face evil intentions, evil actions, but God promises He's always going to turn them in our favor. Do you trust this? I've seen it numerous times. Look at Jesus. Imagine Jesus reciting this psalm. I believe he knew all the psalms by heart. Perhaps he knew all the Old Testament. And we have references that he quoted psalms even on the cross. When he prays in the Gethsemane garden, those of you, Maureen and many others, who have been in Israel, even from Gethsemane garden, when you look up, you do see some hills. And he knows what's coming upon him. He knows the cup. And he prays there in the garden, Father, if there is a chance, if there is another way, please depart this cup from me. I know what's coming. It's evil. It's impossible to even think about it. Is there another way, Father? No. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will. And he there, imagine, referencing this psalm once again. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. But he knows he has to give his life as a ransom for many. And he goes on the cross. And the promise here says, will keep you from all evil. And all the evil of the world comes upon himself on the cross. But the story doesn't end up there. He goes through the death in order for us to experience life. We know, and I'm going to explain in a minute from where we know that Jesus made some references to another psalm, and soon I will conclude. I promise my kids I'll be shorter today. Psalm 16. Psalm 16, we read from verse 8. I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand. I shall not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Do you know that Jesus quoted from these psalms, perhaps exactly these verses, on the cross? When all the evil came upon himself? Peter says it. In his sermon on the Pentecost in Acts 2, he makes references to these verses. So facing evil, he had this vision of what the psalm describes. The promises of God that he will not be abandoned and his soul will not forever be resting in Sheol, in the death. And the Holy One will see no corruption, although he had to go through this valley of death, although he had to fear death. That's why he prayed in Gethsemane. So the promise is, you will not always be spared, but as you go through, he will continue to keep you. And he will keep us till the day when we will meet him in heaven. Till I will and you will finish our pilgrim life through all these spheres of life. Let me conclude with a few questions. Going on through what we recently hear, maybe at the news, who is going to help you when prices on gas, groceries, all the expenses keep rising while income do not keep up? Who is going to help you when temptations arise within your heart? Who is going to help you when Satan launches an attack against your life? Who is going to help you when troubles, trials, and problems overwhelm your heart, mind, and soul? Who is going to help you when the bottom falls out of life and you see nowhere to turn? Who is going to help you when friends, family, finances, to be with F, fail? Who is going to help you when you don't even know how to help yourself? The government thinks it can help. We heard all sorts of promises, isn't it? But they can't help you. Even the church, even your pastor, is insufficient to meet all the needs that arise in our life. There is only one who can help us, and his name is God, the Lord, Yahweh, who never sleeps, who is always there to stretch his hands towards us. I wonder if the Lord is going to keep working in my life. I heard this recently from a Christian that I know. I wonder if the Lord is going to keep working in my life. We know in Philippians, Paul says, the one who began a good work in us will bring it to completion. Do you trust this? Even when you face the greatest fear of death, make sure that he is going to take you into his final rest and peace. And we will get through every single situation. But don't ignore the mountains of fear. Don't look down. Don't look at one another. Do what the psalmist did. I look up. I lift up my eyes. I acknowledge them. I face them. And then I find the answer. Who is going to help? From where my help comes? From the Lord. Amen.